Imagine being denied access to your own money at your own bank. Sounds impossible, right? Well, that's exactly what happened when Zara, the CEO of one of the city's most prestigious banks, tried to make a simple withdrawal. What followed was a shocking confrontation that left an employee's job hanging by a thread, and a lesson that would change everything. Stay tuned to find out how this intense standoff unfolded and what happened next. But before we dive into shocking details, if you're ready for more stories that will leave you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button. It helps our channel grow and brings more unbelievable stories just like this one. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and join our community. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. It was a normal, bustling morning at the downtown headquarters of one of the city's most prestigious banks. The lobby was filled with the sound of phones ringing, employees exchanging quick conversations, and keyboards clacking as they worked through their tasks. Business as usual for the staff who, despite the endless flow of clients, were accustomed to the high-pressure environment of the financial district. However, for one woman, today would be anything but ordinary. Zara Williams, the CEO of the bank, walked through the grand glass doors, her presence undeniable. With a reputation built on sharp intellect, professionalism, and the kind of poise that could command any room, Zara was a force to be reckoned with. Known for her calm demeanor, she was often described as the kind of leader who made decisions with precision and clarity. Yet today, Zara wasn't stepping into the office to oversee corporate strategies or deal with board meetings. She wasn't making any high-level decisions or managing the intricacies of the bank's operations. She simply needed to withdraw a large sum of money from her own bank. A simple task for someone in her position, right? As she approached the counter, the young manager, Megan, looked up and smiled politely, welcoming Zara as she would any other customer. At that moment, Megan had no idea who stood before her. To her, Zara was just another woman in a business suit, ready to make a standard transaction. But as Megan began processing the withdrawal, something changed in her expression. Her fingers, previously typing with ease, paused, and a nervous tension settled in. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Megan said, her tone turning cold and professional. "I can't process this withdrawal." Zara raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback by the refusal. "Why?" she asked, her voice steady, though carrying an undeniable edge of authority. Megan shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her fingers now tapping nervously on the keyboard as she searched for the right words. "It's company policy," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "This amount exceeds the usual withdrawal limit, and I can't process it without approval from senior management." Zara's gaze remained fixed on Megan, and in that moment, the tension between them was palpable. The air seemed to thicken as time stood still. Zara, the CEO of the very bank where this transaction was being denied, was standing at the counter, a powerful woman in control of a massive financial institution, being refused access to her own funds. The absurdity of it struck her sharply. How could this be happening? How could someone in her own bank, someone with no understanding of who she was, challenge her request with such boldness? The frustration began to bubble beneath her calm exterior, but she kept her composure, knowing this moment was far from over. The silence between them stretched on, and the tension in the air grew heavier. Zara remained still, her thoughts racing as she prepared to address the situation head-on. Zara remained silent for a brief moment, her eyes locked onto Megan's. Every inch of her body exuded calm authority, but her mind raced. She could feel the intensity building in the air, and she knew that this was more than just a simple banking transaction. It was about control, respect, and the limits of power. Megan, on the other hand, was visibly sweating. Her nervousness was palpable, beads of sweat forming on her forehead as she tried to process the situation she'd found herself in. She was young, eager to prove herself, and now, in this moment, she was overwhelmed by the weight of her own decision. She had no idea who Zara was, and in this moment, that ignorance seemed to be her biggest mistake. Zara's voice broke the silence, sharp and steady, sending a jolt through Megan's spine. "What are you suggesting?" she asked, her tone unflinching. but every word was weighted with authority. "I run this bank, Megan. The funds you're refusing to release belong to me." The words hung in the air, each one amplifying the growing tension in the lobby. Megan's hands, previously steady, now trembled as she stared at her screen. The realization began to set in. She was speaking to the CEO of the bank, the very woman she had just denied. The color drained from Megan's face, but she tried to maintain composure, muttering the protocol she had been taught. "I understand, ma'am, but I still need senior approval." "It's the protocol." Zara's patience was thinning, but she maintained her calm. She leaned in slightly, closing the space between them. Her gaze was unwavering, and her words were deliberate. "Let's be clear, Megan. You're refusing to serve me, your CEO, in my own bank. Is that the protocol you're referring to?" The words hit Megan like a slap. Her fingers froze on the keyboard, unable to type another word as she processed the enormity of the situation. The realization dawned. She had just denied the most powerful person in the bank. The pressure began to mount, and she could feel her pulse racing in her throat. The tension in the air was now so thick that it felt as if it could choke anyone nearby. Zara's calm, poised demeanor contrasted sharply with Megan's growing panic. Customers who had been quietly waiting in line began to glance over, their attention drawn to the scene unfolding at the counter. Whispers spread through the room as the standoff between the CEO and the employee grew more intense. For Megan, this wasn't just a simple mistake. It was a battle of authority she was ill-equipped to win. She had never anticipated such a confrontation, let alone one with her own CEO. And for Zara, this was just another test. She had dealt with difficult situations in her career before, but even she couldn't ignore the audacity of what had just occurred. Megan had crossed a line, and Zara wasn't about to let it slide. As the seconds ticked by, the pressure built, and Zara knew the time had come to make a decision. Would she let this go, or would she teach Megan, and perhaps the entire bank, a lesson in authority and respect? Decision. She had no idea who Zara was, and in this moment, that ignorance seemed to be her biggest mistake. Zara's voice broke the silence, sharp and steady, sending a jolt through Megan's spine. "What are you suggesting?" she asked, her tone unflinching, but every word was weighted with authority. "I run this bank, Megan. The funds you're refusing to release belong to me." The words hung in the air, each one amplifying the growing tension in the lobby. Megan's hands, previously steady, now trembled as she stared at her screen. The realization began to set in. She was speaking to the CEO of the bank, the very woman she had just denied. The color drained from Megan's face, but she tried to maintain composure, muttering the protocol she had been taught. "I understand, ma'am, but I still need senior approval." "It's the protocol." Zara's patience was thinning, but she maintained her calm. She leaned in slightly, closing the space between them. Her gaze was unwavering, and her words were deliberate. "Let's be clear, Megan. You're refusing to serve me, your CEO, in my own bank. Is that the protocol you're referring to?" The words hit Megan like a slap. Her fingers froze on the keyboard, unable to type another word as she processed the enormity of the situation. The realization dawned. She had just denied the most powerful person in the bank. The pressure began to mount, and she could feel her pulse racing in her throat. The tension in the air was now so thick that it felt as if it could choke anyone nearby. Zara's calm, poised demeanor contrasted sharply with Megan's growing panic. Customers who had been quietly waiting in line began to glance over, their attention drawn to the scene unfolding at the counter. Whispers spread through the room as the standoff between the CEO and the employee grew more intense. For Megan, this wasn't just a simple mistake. It was a battle of authority she was ill-equipped to win. She had never anticipated such a confrontation, let alone one with her own CEO. And for Zara, this was just another test. She had dealt with difficult situations in her career before, but even she couldn't ignore the audacity of what had just occurred. Megan had crossed a line, and Zara wasn't about to let slide. As the seconds ticked by, the pressure built, and Zara knew the time had come to make a decision. Would she let this go, or would she teach Megan, and perhaps the entire bank, a lesson in authority and respect? As the silence stretched on, the tension in the air grew unbearable. Zara could feel every eye in the room on her. Employees who had been busy with their tasks now paused to watch, their attention drawn to the unfolding confrontation. Even the security guard, who had been nonchalantly scanning the room, took a few hesitant steps toward the counter, sensing something was amiss. The eyes of the bank's staff and customers seemed to magnify the already palpable tension. Zara's presence commanded the space, and she knew it. But in this moment, she had to decide how to handle the situation. With a calm, measured exhale, Zara turned her back on the counter and began to walk away, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. Her movements were deliberate, each step calculated. Reaching in her bag, she pulled out her phone. Without a word, she dialed the number of the head of operations. The cool, even tone of her voice when she spoke contrasted sharply with the chaos building inside the bank. Seconds later, Zara's voice cut through the stillness of the room again, louder and sharper than before. "Give me the head of operations. Now." Megan stood frozen, her body stiff with anxiety. Her mind raced, trying to process the unfolding disaster. She had no idea who Zara truly was until the CEO's call echoed through the lobby. The realization hit her hard. She had just crossed a line that should never have been crossed. Her face drained of color as she frantically scanned the room, hoping someone, anyone, would intervene, but no one did. She could only stand there, trapped in the weight of her mistake. Moments later, the head of operations arrived, her eyes widening as she took in the scene before her. She had been briefed by Zara's assistant on the situation, but seeing it firsthand was something entirely different. Zara's calmness in the face of this chaos only intensified the tension. There was no screaming, no drama, just an icy composure that spoke volumes. "Get this transaction completed now," Zara said coldly, her voice still steady but firm. The words left no room for negotiation, and the air seemed to crackle with authority. Megan stood there, completely out of her depth. Her hands trembled at her sides as she fought to compose herself. The pressure of the moment bore down on her, and her mind swirled with the realization that she had made a mistake that would define her career. She could feel the weight of the room's attention on her, every person in the lobby silently waiting for the next move. The head of operations stepped forward, her face grim, and nodded in understanding. But even as the situation began to resolve itself, the damage had been done. Megan's mistake was a costly one, not just for her, but for the institution she worked for. Zara turned to face the operations head, her expression unchanged. It was clear to her that this incident was more than a momentary glitch. It was a lesson that would ripple through the entire organization. Respect, authority, and responsibility were not things to be taken lightly. As the transaction was processed, Zara knew that Megan's actions would not soon be forgotten. Neither would the lesson learned by everyone who had witnessed the spectacle unfold. Minutes later, Zara's phone rang again. Her assistant's voice came through the line, calm and professional, confirming that the withdrawal had been authorized and processed. As the words registered, Zara's expression didn't shift. She remained poised, unshaken by the tension that had escalated in the room. With the same calm precision that had marked every action up to this point, she took the money from the counter and handed it to the waiting clerk, completing the transaction with finality. Zara turned back to Megan, who was still standing there, her face pale with embarrassment. "Megan," Zara began, her voice colder now, more authoritative, "you've broken the most important rule in this bank. Respect. Respect for authority, respect for your colleagues, and respect for your customers, especially when that customer is your CEO. You've failed in every way." The weight of Zara's words hit Megan like a ton of bricks. Her face flushed a deep shade of red, and she opened her mouth to offer some form of apology or explanation, but the words caught in her throat. There was nothing she could say that would make this right. Zara had made her point loud and clear, and Megan, now fully aware of the severity of her mistake, stood there frozen, unable to respond. Zara, however, wasn't done. The situation had reached a point where action was necessary, not just for Megan, but as a message to everyone who worked at the bank. Zara turned to the head of operations, who had been standing silently by the counter, watching the drama unfold. There was no need for elaborate speeches or long explanations. Zara's decision had been made. "You know what to do," she said simply, her voice firm but devoid of any further emotion. The authority in her words was unquestionable, and the air in the room seemed to hang heavy with the expectation of what was coming next. The operations head nodded silently, stepping forward. She addressed Megan in a low voice, her tone sympathetic but resolute. The room fell into a hushed stillness as the gravity of the situation became clear. Megan's expression shifted rapidly, from disbelief to realization, and finally to fear. The weight of the consequences was sinking in. Within minutes, Megan's future at the bank was on the line. The decision had been made, and there would be no turning back. As Zara walked away from the counter, her mind was already focused on what needed to be done next. This wasn't just about one employee's mistake. It was about setting a precedent for the entire bank. Respect was the cornerstone of the institution, and Zara was making sure that lesson would not soon be forgotten. As Zara walked out of the bank, her demeanor remained composed, unshaken by the chaos she had just orchestrated. Her footsteps echoed softly in the lobby as she passed the stunned employees and curious customers who had witnessed the dramatic showdown. The incident would undoubtedly be the topic of discussion for weeks, maybe even months. Whispers would circulate, and rumors would spread. But to Zara, it was just another day, another reminder of the core principles that had propelled her to the top. Integrity, respect, and, above all, knowing when to stand your ground. She didn't feel the need to explain herself to anyone. Her actions had spoken louder than any words ever could. Zara's leadership was rooted in fairness, transparency, and a deep respect for the people she worked with. But she also understood the importance of maintaining authority. Respect wasn't something that could be given freely. It had to be earned, and when it was taken for granted, there would be consequences. Zara knew that sometimes tough lessons had to be learned the hard way. For Megan, the events of that day would linger long after the tension had dissipated. The young manager had learned a painful and costly lesson in the weight of her decisions. In a corporate world that was often ruthless and unforgiving, Megan had learned firsthand how important it was to understand the people you were working with. It wasn't just about following protocols or checking boxes. It was about understanding the value of respect and recognizing authority, no matter the hierarchy. Megan's mistake was not just a simple failure to process a transaction. It was a failure to acknowledge the person standing before her. She had allowed her nerves, her inexperience, and her rigid adherence to the rules to cloud her judgment. In the end, it wasn't about the money or the transaction. It was about respect. And in that regard, Megan had failed. Zara's actions were not intended to make an example out of one employee. They were about setting a standard that would ripple throughout the organization. The message was clear: never underestimate the power of respect. It didn't matter what your title was or how long you'd been at the company. Everyone, from the CEO to the newest employee, deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. Zara had made that point loud and clear, and now it was up to everyone at the bank to carry that lesson forward. In the world of business, power isn't just about titles. It's about respect. When you know your worth and stay true to your principles, even the most tense situations can turn in your favor. Respect, once broken, is hard to rebuild, but it's the foundation of any lasting success. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more shocking, real-life corporate battles, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the bell notification so you never miss a story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.